ventilation. When your animal house is not properly ventilated, then this chronic respiratory disease can be transmitted to other animals. And dust particles also can transmit it, you know, since dust is the hair carries it. So any animal that respires or inspires that dust particle that is contaminated will definitely get infected. And the symptoms are difficulty in breathing. The animal finds it very difficult to breathe. Then you observe discharge from the mouth and the nostril. The mouth and the nostril, you observe discharge. Then the animal begins to make a choking noise. Then the animal loses its appetite. It doesn't want to feed. Sometimes it leads to death. The control: first, you isolate infected animals, you vaccinate them. Then proper or good sanitation is also required. You bury dead animals, then you provide good ventilation such that the animals can respire very well, they can breathe very well. So a good ventilation is very essential to control chronic respiratory disease. Now we move on to talk about bacterial diseases. The first is tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is the first bacterial disease I'll be talking about now, and it's caused by a bacteria. Like I said, it's a bacterial disease called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Mycobacterium tuberculosis is the causal organism of tuberculosis, and the mode of transmission is by breathing of hair contaminated with germs. Once the animal breathes in and hair that is contaminated with germs, the animal can be infected. Also, by the time the animal gets in contact with feed and water that has been contaminated with droppings and litters, then an animal can get infected. The symptoms: first is death, then loss of weight. If the animal does not die instantly, loss of weight. Then production of stringy sputum mixed with blood or pus. The animal begins to release some sputum from the mouth, but you discover either pus or blood in the sputum. Then the animal's milk production will be reduced. The rate at which it produces milk will be reduced. Then sometimes the cough of the animal becomes soft and moist, something like that. Then you have acute dry cough, which becomes more frequent and painful as the disease progresses. So as the disease becomes progressive in the animal, the animal might experience acute dry cough, which becomes more frequent and painful. Then you can observe pale comb, that is the comb of the animal, of the bird, and wattles in bed. You observe that the comb is not as shiny or as strong as it used to be. Then the animal will also experience difficulty in breathing. How do you control tuberculosis in animals? First, you isolate infected animals. Vaccination is very, very essential. Then good sanitation, you cannot underemphasize that. Then you slaughter infected animals. Chemoprophylaxis is also recommended. Then the next bacterial disease is anthrax. The causal organism is also a bacterium. The mode of transmission: contaminated feed and animal with blood and excretion can lead to a transfer of anthrax. Then direct contact with contaminated animals and with equipment that is used for contaminated animals will also lead to a transmission of the anthrax disease. So, as an animal keeper, you've got to be careful when you are dealing with your animals. You sterilize your equipment. Once you use it for an animal, you don't just use for all of them straight up, because you don't know the kind of disease that each one is carrying that is not yet manifesting. So you disinfect your equipment before using it for the next animal. Symptoms: sudden death, very high fever, discharge of blood from all openings of the animal, like the nose, the mouth, the anus. You begin to see blood, so you know that something is actually wrong here, and you suspect anthrax. The next is loss of appetite, emaciation, depression. The animal is not active, it's just depressed. Then the functions of the animal, you discover that is reduced. For instance, milk production is reduced. How do you control anthrax? First, you isolate infected animals. Then another thing you should do as an animal farmer is regular vaccination. Then good sanitation will help in controlling anthrax. The next bacterial disease is brucellosis, which is also called contagious bovine abortion. The causal organism is called Brucella abortus or Brucella species. An example is Swiss or Melentensis. Mode of transmission is by feed and water contaminated by discharge and aborted fetus. This kind of disease leads to an abortion of the fetus. So once feed or animal is contaminated by either discharge or the aborted fetus, then any animal that gets in contact with that feed will get infected. The symptoms of brucellosis is first, abortion in animals. Then you discover full-term stillbirth, that is, the animal is due for delivery, but the young one is also given birth to a stillbirth. That's an indication of brucellosis. Emaciation is another one. High fever. Then infertility in male animals. Male animals become infertile. Then lameness or paralysis may occur in pigs. Then you observe reduced milk production. Another one is inflammation of the uterus or the scrotum. Then diarrhea and dysentery might also be seen in an infected animal. How do you control brucellosis? First, segregation. You separate an infected animal from other healthy ones. Then you should engage in good sanitary measures. Then vaccination. Vaccinate your animals before breeding. Before breeding, of course, make sure they are properly vaccinated so that you don't have a case of brucellosis. The next bacterial disease is bovine masticism, caused by bacteria, and transmission is through injuries on udder and teeth, that is, on the mammary gland. Injuries, when you observe injuries on the udder and teeth, that's a way to get infected. Then dirty environment. Cleanliness is very essential when you are dealing with these animals. Then contaminated feed, water, and equipment with bacteria from infected animals. I mentioned that earlier, that you don't just use your equipment and treat them carelessly. You disinfect them once you are done with an animal before you use it for the next animal. So contaminated equipment can also transmit bovine mastitis. Then symptoms. First, you discover uneasiness in cow during milking. When you are milking your animal, the animal is experiencing pain. That's a symptom of bovine mastitis. The next is swollen or hot udder. The mammary gland will be swollen and will be hot when you feel it. The next is that the udder becomes very painful. Very painful. So this has to do, you observe it when you are engaging in milk production. You observe this majorly. This bovine mastitis in milk production, you discover that the udder is swollen, hot, is painful. Then the animal is not comfortable during milk production or milking. Then the body temperature of the animal increases. Then you discover that the clotting of blood is rampant. Then just overcrowds other animals. How do you control bovine mastitis? First, you disinfect your hand before you milk animals, so that you don't have a case after you milk an infected animal, unknowing to you, just use the same hand without disinfecting it to touch at the udder of another animal. So you disinfect your hand before you milk the next animal. Another thing is that you wipe your feet with antiseptic before and after milking. Wipe feet with antiseptic before and after milking. Then proper sanitation in the barns and sheds of the animals. Then you should avoid overcrowding the animals. Avoid overcrowding. Then use antibiotics at drying off period for the animal. Use antibiotics. The next bacterial disease is fowlpox, caused by a bacteria also. Then the mode of transmission is by direct contact with infected animals. Then when the animal eats or drink with material that has been contaminated from or by an infected animal, then the healthy animal gets infected. What are the symptoms of fowlpox? The first is rough brown wart-like sauce on the head of the animal. You discover that there is a rough brown wart-like sauce on the head of the animal. Then the mouth is sore. Then the eyes also may develop sores. So those are symptoms. A way to control it is to segregate infected animals. Then vaccination. Chemoprophylaxis is also essential to control fowlpox. The next, now we move on to talk about the next category of diseases. That's the one caused by protozoa. And the first in that class is trypanosomiasis, which is also called Sura, Nangana, or sleeping sickness. And it is transmitted majorly by tsetse fly and other infective flies. But majorly, tsetse fly transmits trypanosomiasis. Symptoms. First, the animal has intermittent fever. Unthriftiness is seen also. The body temperature increases. The animal is very nervous. Paralysis. The animal is also active. Then there is a loss of appetite. The animal sleeps a lot. That is why the sickness is termed sleeping sickness. The animal sleeps a lot. It can lead to death or abortion. So those are the symptoms of sleeping sickness. How do you control it? First, get rid of antidotes. Antidotes could be carriers too. So get rid of them around your cattle. Then keep resistant varieties of cattle like the Ndama. Ndama is a resistant variety. So don't keep cattle that are vulnerable to the attack of trypanosomiasis. The next is that you clear bushes around your farm so that the tsetse fly don't have breeding places around your farm. Then you spray the bush with insecticide.